Thank you for coming to my session. My impromptu find out at 11:45 last night you're doing a session. And at first I was a little worried. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I thought, no, I just want to come talk to folks and kind of let them know what we're doing at KVEC, a little bit about some research that I have done on the use of micro-credentials in our region, and let's just have a good time. Let's just talk and learn from each other. So let me tell you a little bit about KVEC. And as I look around, a lot of you folks are KVEC, so you know about KVEC. But we are a educational service agency. There are 9 cooperatives across the state of Kentucky, located geographically. Districts choose to belong to an educational cooperative. We have 23 districts. So when I first started at KVEC back in 2013, I guess it was 13, there were only 17 districts. So we have grown quite substantially over time. We serve 139 schools, a little over 3,000 teachers, and over 50,000 students. So that's a pretty good size service area. Geographically, Jeff always points out, Dr. Hawkins always points out that our service area is larger, especially now that we've added these districts, larger than the state of Connecticut. So we put some miles on our cars going to visit folks and work side by side with folks in their schools. We provide comprehensive educational services to our districts. We have a special education cooperative in our cooperative. So we're covering special needs all the way through to helping schools plan for successful post-secondary transitions. So we try to do a little bit of everything. We are definitely our school's primary source for professional learning. Definitely. We're their first go-to for coming to your school to address professional learning needs, for district professional learning, to offering sessions at KVEC. We are definitely the primary professional learning provider for those districts that we serve. There's no way you can read that. That is a slide that I borrowed from Dr. Hawkins, but really talking about the fact that at KVEC, what we're seeking to do, he always says that there is not a problem that exists in our region that the people of that region with their good minds cannot work together to solve. And he really believes that, and we all believe that we are the experts about the students that we serve, the communities we live in, and the problems that we face. And that if we roll our sleeves up and we work together, we can develop solutions to those problems. And a lot of times those solutions can cross geography lines and help other folks in other communities like ours with solutions to their problems. So some of the programs that we have, we fund learning innovation grants to teachers as teachers identify problems of practice in their classroom. We give them, it's just a micro grant, $1,000, but $1,000 to a teacher to develop a solution to a problem that they have in their classroom, that's like they've hit the lottery. And those folks come together twice a year in a fall summit to share a plan, an action research plan. This is what I plan to do with this money. This is the impact I expect to see on my professional practice. This is the impact I expect to see in my classroom. And then they come back in the spring, in April, and share their results. That April summit is like a revival. We all come in, we are all sharing successes, we're all sharing improved student outcomes. This is what we've done, and it is a wonderful experience. We have a lot of different entrepreneurial programs given to student teams to help them solve relevant community challenges or problems that they see in their communities. Building it forward, you all have probably heard of this initiative that we have going on in KVEC. We have our students who are in our ATCs, our area technology centers, technical centers, who are through seed money that is provided by KVEC, the students are building tiny houses. And those tiny houses then go on display at our summit. They are auctioned off to folks from all over the United States who come from all over to take these tiny houses. And something exciting that happened as a result of some of that work, we were sharing it at in Frankfurt at the Capitol one day, and someone from the Veterans Administration came up and started talking to us and said that, we have a real problem for homeless veterans who come back and they need housing. And would you all be interested maybe in working with us to build tiny houses for these veterans? And we were like, oh my gosh, yes. So Dr. Deci Bolling is the spearhead behind that program, and it's amazing the work that these kids are doing. Next week we will have 8 or 9 of those tiny houses on display at Veck for folks to do a final walkthrough and kind of see them all in one place at one time. And the bidding has opened on those. So if you're in the market for a tiny house, there you go. And they are absolutely beautiful. The woodwork, the design elements. Some of these folks are on their third tiny house that they have, the third one that they have built. This program has been going on for about 3 years, and they are crafty. They're learning neat ways to store things. Little side pockets of the stair that opens up and your mop and your broom can go in there, and they're really thinking differently about space. So I mentioned the fire summits. We have a wonderful place-based learning management system, social learning network called theholler.org. When I first heard the name, I was like, there's no way I can go around and call something the Holler. But now it just kind of rolls off your tongue. You're kind of used to it by now. Theholler.org is really the place where you can go to learn about the different things that are going on at Veck, but also a place where you can interact with people through different little smaller hollers around specific aspects of practice, place to see video research that's going on in our programs. It's just a really great place where you can go see the things that are going on in our Veck region. And then a program that I work directly with is the Activating Catalytic Transformation Network, or we call ACT. And these are schools who voluntarily apply to be a part of this work. They apply because we are not capable of serving everybody in this model at one time, but we're bringing them in phases as schools deem themselves ready and their applications show that they are ready to come together as a shared leadership team representing the principal, teacher leadership, district office leadership, and community leadership to analyze all sources of their data. And so we're not just looking at what we call the autopsy data. We're not just looking at state test scores after it's too late to do anything about it. We're actually looking at demographic data, perception data, student learning data in terms of classroom formative assessments or interim benchmark assessments, or even just progress monitoring records, really looking at student learning, looking at our program data. What programs are our students participating in? What kind of impact are those programs having? And then we train those schools in how to analyze that data and actually analyze even the intersections of that data. So if let's look at our students who are living with grandparents. How are they scoring on our interim benchmark assessment? What interventions are they being provided? What extracurricular activities are they engaged in? And do they feel like there's somebody in this school that they can talk to? Is there a adult in this building that these students feel that they can talk to? Really looking at those sources of data and how they intersect across each other to identify a problem of practice that exists in their school that they feel can best be solved by this shared leadership approach. They develop a theory of action, a logic model that says these are our desired outcomes around this problem of practice. Here's what teachers are going to, just going back to what Dr. Wolf said this morning, here's what the teachers are going to do to act on that problem of practice, because those teachers are that first line with our students about change. So what can teachers do, and what do teachers need in order to do that? Do they need professional learning? Are there micro-credentials that exist that can help a teacher get where they're going? Is there other types of professional learning? When we talk about professional learning, we talk about mentoring, coaching, networking, clinical professional learning, micro-credentials. We talk about lots of different types of professional learning. What do teachers need in order to get there? Same thing for principals. what do principals need in order to support teachers to get to those desired results? Do they need professional learning? What is the professional learning out there? Do they need to network with other principals? Something that we found in our region a few years ago was that our principals were lonely. The only professional learning they were being provided was compliance professional learning. Here's how you dot your I's and cross your T's and fill out your forms and stay in compliance with federal programs, and this is what you need to do. They didn't have a time to sit elbow to elbow with their colleagues who were doing the same kind of work and talk about how we can do it better, how we can be innovative, how we can work together. They didn't have that opportunity. So we have brought that together through cadres and networks in our KVEC region. Principals, a lot of times, and this is coming from a former instructional supervisor, principals a lot of times face barriers by what the district office places on them. Not that I ever did that. I never gave a principal a barrier at all. You know, lesson plans, assessments, we got to see this, we got to see this, we got to see this. But how can a district office person support a principal rather than adding roadblocks and challenges and barriers and more paperwork? How can that central office support that principal who is supporting their teachers get to these desired outcomes? And then the last layer of that, and the one that is still giving me fits, but I will figure it out one way or the other, is community. How can the community really engage as part of a school community to support all of those key players in advancing outcomes? How do we get to that relevance? How do we get to that real world piece? And that to me, when we get all of these pieces firing on all cylinders, we'll be exactly where we need to be. But right now, we're going into our 3rd year of our ACT network. And I will say that every school that has participated has met their desired outcomes. But they're not finished, because when you set an outcome, you've got to keep at it. You know, if we want to increase learner engagement, decrease student absences and student behavior referrals, you can't just say, oh, we did it, we're done. You know, it's one of those things that you keep after. You keep after for improvement. You keep after for building better. So we've seen some phenomenal work come out of those ACT schools, and a big piece of that work that has come out of the ACT schools are our micro-credentials and our engagement with micro-credentials. Because as these folks analyze their data and frame their problem of practice, and then say, now we've got to sit down and really figure out a logic model, an action-based, research-based logic model that's going to get us to a solution. Professional learning is a huge component of that. And in Kentucky, I got to look around. I got to check my audience out. In Kentucky, we are in our 2nd biennium of $0 for professional learning. So schools, I see a lot of people shaking their heads, so it's probably a nationwide problem, but teachers are required to have 4 days of professional learning, but you get $0 to do it. So we don't want folks just going for what is free and for what is out there. We really, truly believe that we want our teachers to experience the type of learning that we want happening in classrooms for students. And micro-credentials, as part of a competency-based professional learning system, accompanied by coaching, accompanied by mentoring, accompanied by networking, all of those things have to be there. But we think micro-credentials are a great way for teachers to engage in that clinical professional learning. Just like doctors and nurses and x-ray techs and all of those folks in the medical field have clinical practices where they go in, they work on real people in real time. Teachers need that same opportunity to engage in that action research cycle and to engage in that deeper thinking about what they are doing, to reflect on their own practice, to determine, did this help? Did this work? What's next? What has changed? Why did that change? I said earlier, I'm old. I'm real old. I've been doing this work for 29 years, and for a great portion of it, I have been a professional learning provider. I have done more 6-hour workshops than anybody would ever care to talk about. But at the end of that 6 hours, when I come up and I give somebody that certificate, and I say, here you go, all that certificate says is you did a really good job of sitting in that chair for 6 hours. It does not mean that anything about your professional practice has changed or will change. And it doesn't mean that your students are one bit better off for the fact that you sat for 6 hours in Jennifer Carroll's PD session on formative assessment. It does not. But with a micro-credential, you can engage in research, as much research as you want. So if you're a research nut like I am and you want to learn everything that there is to learn out there, it's limitless. The micro-credential itself will give you research and resources that you can learn from, but you don't even have to stop there. You can keep going. You can Google this and Google that and grab books off your colleagues' shelves, and you can learn all you want to learn. And then apply that in a classroom setting with real students and gather evidence and artifacts and say, here was my lesson plan, and here was the student work, and here's the video of me doing this, and here's what I think about it. This is why I chose this. This was my need. This is what I did. This is what happened. Gosh, if we could just figure out a way to get a 6-hour workshop to do that. But instead, we have this wonderful way of reaching teachers anywhere where they can do this and also do it as part of a professional learning community. There's nothing that says I have to do this by myself. And as a matter of fact, we have 2 lovely ladies here who have been part, you've probably read about them in the Digital Promise blog, from Allen Elementary School in the Veck region. They were part of our ACT network. They dug down deep into learning more about active student engagement. Our kids are engaged, but they're passively engaged. How do we get them active? How do we move from teacher as director of learning to students engaged in inquiry and learning on their own and asking questions? How do we do that? And they identified a micro-credential that they wanted to work on as a school. And in grade level PLCs, they worked together on the micro-credential. So they brought in their lesson plans and talked to each other about them. This is what I'm planning to do. What do you think about this? Well, I might need to do this, and you might need to do that, and I think that's great. Okay, I'm going to video. Would you come in and video me? Because, I don't want to just put it on the tripod and hope I hit myself sometime. I want somebody to video it and get over my students' shoulders and see the work. Will you do that? Sure, I'll do that for you. Okay, well, now I'm trying to upload this file, and it's way too big, and it won't let me do it, so I need help. Well, what I did was I saved it as a Google file, and then I just provided a link to my Google folder. Oh, that's a really good idea. So they helped each other through the process. They worked together as a learning community to focus on an area of need, to analyze what was going on in their classroom, to analyze what each other was doing, provide feedback, provide support. And they were a strong staff to begin with. But when we talk to them about this, they really feel like it helped their reflective practice. It helped their professional learning community be a little bit tighter and a little bit more focused on student results. And that's happening in a lot of different places. It's not just about the standalone. So as we've been working with our ACT teams, these are some of the micro-credentials that we have developed based on regional need. And I will tell you one, the assessment literacy one. First of all, I will say this. Some of our first micro-credentials, I'm ready to go back and change them because I've learned a lot about the development, the instructional design of a micro-credential. And I want to go back and work on some. But the assessment literacy one is a very familiar and very popular micro-credential, because about 8 years ago in Kentucky, we had a really strong push on assessment literacy. We were organized due to some Gates funding into networks. So we had ELA networks and math networks, and the new standards, or the Common Core standards that we were adopting were coming out, and there was a lot of work going on. And we were training teachers left and right on assessment literacy, and Rick Stiggins and Jan Chapuis, and everybody knew about target method match and learning targets, and we were immersed in it. But that was 8 years ago. And a lot of those teachers have since, because they were your teacher leaders that were in those trainings, they have retired, they've taken central office jobs, they've moved on to something else. We lost a lot of that institutional knowledge about assessment literacy that we had in our schools. And there aren't Gates dollars floating around Kentucky now for us to bring everybody in and do that all over again. And was that the really best way to do it? Because people came in, they learned for 6 hours about the Rick Stiggins model, they got the big Castle book, and we sent them on their way. And truthfully, I went back into a classroom of a teacher that had been in one of our networks, and as I was walking out the door, she went and picked up her big Castle book and said, "Do you want this back?" "No, I don't really need it back." Well, it was just another one of those initiatives. But we've developed an assessment literacy micro-credential where people learn about formative assessment and summative assessment and developing learning targets, and they actually have to take an assessment and analyze it, and take student work that went along with that assessment and analyze it, and provide a reflection, provide video of them talking with students around their submission. You can't look at that as a failed initiative. That has been applied in a classroom, and someone has learned from that. So we developed that assessment literacy as a way to help our districts who were needing their teachers to get that training. You know, we had a whole slew of them a while back, and they're all gone now, and we need some training in assessment literacy. Well, we can't go out and train every new teacher in assessment literacy, but we can help them to earn an assessment literacy micro-credential. If there is a cadre of 6 or 7 new teachers in a school, they could work together to earn that assessment literacy micro-credential, and they could even work shoulder to shoulder with someone who is good at it, who can help coach them through it. So it is a very neat model. These are the ones that we have developed, and this stack that we are currently working on is getting a whole lot of attention. I actually had an interview with a reporter from EdScoop last week who's ready to do a feature story on this. We really know, and you know too, that when we talk about poverty, there are different types of poverty. If you've done any research under Ruby Payne or Eric Jensen, you know that there are types of poverty. Most of the poverty that we see in our region is generational. They've been living in poverty for years. And a lot of that's due to the coal industry being gone, but a lot of that is just due to where we are. But there are also students who are living in situational poverty. Their parents are divorced or incarcerated, or we've lost a job. And we have to, as educators, we have to understand the types of poverty that our students are coming from. But there are also different types of rural. And I have a hard time, getting a lot of folks who think they know rural, they're from rural areas, but their rural is not the same as our rural. You know, if you are in an agriculturally vibrant rural area, that is a totally different rural than kids who are living down a holler that are 3.5, 4 hours away from a major town. who are living in poverty. And when you ask them to go home and do a poster about the food groups, first of all, they don't have 79 cents to buy a poster. They don't have any transportation to get to the store to buy the poster. And then they're going home to families who can't or won't help them with the poster. We have to know and understand the kinds of poverty that we're dealing with, not as excuses, but as ways for us as educators to find ways for those students to be successful in spite of challenges that they have. There are ways. So we are developing a stack of 5 micro-credentials around understanding rural students from poverty. The first one, just like Dr. Wolf talked about, they're sort of layered in a kind of a taxonomy layer. The first is that understanding types of poverty. And this is not an easy micro-credential to earn, because it's not just, can I answer 50 multiple choice questions about different types of poverty? To earn that micro-credential, you actually have to collect data about your students. Demographic data. What kind of poverty are they living in? Are they living with their grandparents? Are they living in foster homes? Where do they live in our county? Kind of knowing geographically where they are. Do they receive free and reduced lunch, which most of our schools are 100% through the community ed option? What do I know about these students? If I have a problem, who do I talk to about these students? Who has custody? I mean, there's a whole plethora of things that we need to know about these students. And a lot of times, teachers get this data kind of informally. They don't go through a formal process of collecting that data about their kids. This micro-credential requires you to do that, to really collect data and organize it visually. Teachers have to create a data visualization about their students. So here are the kids that I serve. Here are the ones that live with grandparents. Here are the ones that have zero transportation to school. Here are the ones that participate in interventions. Here are the ones that participate in no extracurricular activities. They have to be on that bus when that bus pulls out because no one can come get them. We have to know those things about our students and to create a data visualization that they can keep in their lesson plan book at their fingertips so they know who their students are and they can add to that visualization as they learn more about those students. I think that's a powerful micro-credential. To analyze your own data, create a data visualization about it, and then talk about how you can use that data to better provide services to students. So what have you learned about your students that's going to impact your practice? And plus, it's fun. It's useful. It's relevant. It's something I can actually get into because I'm going to be able to use this all year long with these students. And you know what? I can pass it on to somebody who needs to know this about my students. So rather than one day in the teacher's lounge, I find out that so-and-so's dad has been in prison. And then 2 weeks later, I find out that so-and-so's dad has been in prison and they lost their house. And then I find out this, and then I find out that. I can start to dig this data out, mine this data, because it exists. It exists in our information systems. It exists in the people who had these students before me. It exists in talking to my students. I can mine this data myself, and then I can create that visualization. Other ones that we're doing, building relationships is developed. It will be coming in July. These will be housed on Digital Promise. So if you're wondering where they are, that's where they will be. A next one that is in development, it's almost finished, is social, emotional, and trauma-informed teaching practices. Our state passed legislation this last session that requires all teachers to have training in and use trauma-informed care practices. Remember I said we don't have any professional learning money? So rather than just send people to go, do something that's district organized or whatever, why not let them engage in actual research around what are those trauma-informed practices that I can use with my students, based on the kinds of situations that my students are coming to me with. Then another on learning structures, how we develop those higher order thinking skills and provide frameworks and templates and graphic organizers and tools for students to develop those higher order thinking skills. And then the last one is interventions. How do we move from a deficit model of interventions to a strengths-based model? Rather than students feeling punished because they need interventions, let's make it a positive experience for kids. And we have examples of where that is going on in our region, where from 10 o'clock to 10:30 every day, the school goes into intervention mode. And the kids that need enrichment, they're going over here. And the kids that right now, today, I had a problem learning fractions of how to find a common denominator. I need help. Rather than waiting till Thursday afternoon when tutoring is going on, that day, 10 o'clock, the teacher had learning targets. She noted that I was having a problem with that, and I get to stay with her and 5 or 6 other kids who were having that same problem, and we will work on that together, and the others are going to go someplace else. This school is actually seeing kids want to stay for interventions. Teachers are saying, I don't even know that they're having problems with fractions, but they say, I still am not really sure I'm doing this right. Can I stay? Absolutely. You stay. We'll work on it. But we're going to do it in a different way. I'm not going to do it louder and more often. I'm going to do it in a different way. And we're going to learn how to find those common denominators. And that way, you don't have to unlearn something next Thursday when tutoring rolls around and you've been doing it incorrectly for 4 days. And now I'm going to try to figure out how to do it the right way. So pretty powerful stuff, fun stuff that we're working on. And as I said, it's getting a little traction across the folks that know about micro-credentials. Now, in 19 minutes, I'm going to tell you all about some research that we have conducted around the use of micro-credentials in our classrooms. So there is a lot of qualitative research about micro-credentials out there. A lot of it kind of focuses on, do teachers like it? Do you think it's making an impact? Do you think teachers' practice is changing? Has your practice changed? But we wanted to get a little bit into some quantitative data. We do know that there are theoretical connections between micro-credentials and Malcolm Knowles' theory of andragogy. I'm going to bore you to death with some of this stuff. And also Learning Forward, which has our standards for professional learning that are adopted as national standards. Though all of those micro-credentials, theories of andragogy, standards for professional learning are all really theoretically connected. So as we talk about Malcolm Knowles saying that adult learning is focused on life experiences and problem-centered and relevance and timeliness, that's exactly what Learning Forward standards say, that teachers look for and need professional learning that grows out of professional learning communities, that's based on data, that helps solve problems, that have different learning designs, that impact student outcomes. All of those things are theoretically connected. So our research was to use inferential statistical research to study a sample of 100 teachers in the Veck region to compare the impact of micro-credentials for professional learning to the same teacher region, same sample of teachers who engaged in other types of professional learning. Now that runs the gamut. That runs from going to things at Veck to district developed to going to something in Lexington that's been offered nationally, whatever. But to compare 50 teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing to 50 teachers who engaged in other forms of professional learning to determine the impact on educator professional practice, on student outcomes, and educator perception of that professional learning. And not just, did you like it? Was it fun? But actually to measure their perception on how do you feel this professional learning measures up to those national standards for professional learning, to those Learning Forward standards. So we were really looking to see if those teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing have higher professional practice ratings, student achievement scores, and a more positive perception of their professional learning experience. So that first research question looks into those professional practice ratings. How do those ratings compare? Teachers who engage in micro-credentialing, teachers who engage in other forms. Then the next was about the student achievement. For the professional practice ratings, we used the Kentucky Framework for Teaching, which is in Kentucky, all of you all know, is adapted from the Danielson Framework. Okay, it's basically the Danielson Framework with Kentucky Framework for Teaching put on the front of it. So that is the measure. Research question 2, looking at student achievement. In our region, the most common interim assessment, benchmark assessment that we use is MAP, from the Northwest Evaluation Association, Measures of Academic Progress. So we used MAP scores, spring 2019 MAP scores of those students. And the research question 3 was actually looking at educator perception of their professional learning, aligned to Learning Forward standards for professional learning. I received permission from those folks to use their standard assessment inventory, which is usually part of a for-fee service that Learning Forward provides, where they will come in and assess your educators to see how they feel their professional learning is stacking up. But they agreed that I could use their survey instrument if I cited that in my research. So there were some limitations, of course, of our study. The first very well being the inaccuracy of principal ratings of teachers. And historically, that is a problem. Whether you're using the Danielson framework, a Marzano framework, any type of framework, principals tend to rate their teachers higher than what they actually would be if you followed the rubric. As a matter of fact, Kentucky changed their professional growth and evaluation system because in 2015, the last year that our program was in regulation, 93.5% of teachers were rated accomplished or effective. So that's kind of high. So that lends a problem as you start to kind of look at professional practice ratings of teachers. There are more elementary teachers than secondary teachers in our KVEC region who are using micro-credentials for professional learning. That's, I guess, understandable in a way, because right now a lot of the micro-credentials that exist are more about pedagogy than they are about content. And high school teachers, maybe not rightly so, but are more concerned about content than pedagogy. So they're looking for, I need that math micro-credential or that chemistry micro-credential, rather than I need a micro-credential about student engagement. So that's where we are with that. And the administration of that MAP assessment is not governed by administrative regulation. Some schools and districts follow testing code procedures when they administer the MAP assessment. So they administer accommodations exactly the way they need to be. They set the testing environment up the way it needs to be, but others do not. They allow extra time. They allow readers when readers aren't required by the IEP. So the assessment could be administered differently than the state assessment. I used independent t-test to compare those 3 things, the professional practice ratings of the teachers in the sample, and to compare their spring interim assessment scores, and to compare their ratings on the Learning Forward Standards Assessment Inventory. I told you a little bit about where that came from. This kind of tells you about the teachers who were in the study, 50 for micro-credentialing, 50 for other forms. 10 or less years of experience. That was equally split in the teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing, but it was a little different in the other forms. 13 had 10 years or less. 37 had more than 10 years. And then you can see a little bit the numbers there. 37 of the micro-credentialing teachers were elementary, whereas 13 were secondary, 41 were elementary, and the other 9 were secondary. So the findings, there were not any significant findings in terms of the professional practice. There wasn't enough significant difference. This was done, I'm not going to go through all the statistical stuff, We used a 95% confidence interval, an alpha of 0.05. There was not significant difference to reject the null hypothesis there. And I told you a little bit about the limitations and why that might be. But findings for research question 2, in comparing those MAP interim assessment scores of students whose teachers engaged in micro-credentialing and those whose teachers engaged in other forms of professional learning, there was a statistically significant difference to reject the null hypothesis. For those that had significant difference, we did a Cohen's d to determine the effect size, and the effect size on that was a 0.7, so it was a moderate effect size. So there was a statistically different mean for the teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing and the teachers who engaged in traditional professional learning. And I'm like, yay. That is wonderful. And then findings for research question 3. This was the bane of my existence because this Learning Forward Standards Assessment Inventory had 50 items. So I not only conducted a t-test on the overall ratings of the perception survey by teachers, but I did a t-test for every single question. Not smart, but I did it anyway. So in comparing the responses on that Learning Forward Standards Assessment Inventory by educators who engaged in micro-credentialing to those engaged in other forms of professional learning, there was a significant statistical difference between the ratings by the teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing compared to the teachers who engaged in traditional professional learning at an even, same way with question 2, at an even greater confidence interval. And the Cohen's d effect size for that was a 0.27, so the effect was small, but it was still statistically different enough that we could reject that null hypothesis and say that the teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing had higher perception ratings of the professional development they engaged in. Now, that survey is grouped into the Learning Forward standards. So the 2 standards that had the greatest score, the greatest difference in the mean was the learning designs, which is how is that professional learning designed? What is the instructional method? And thank goodness that one was high because a micro-credential is a very different format for professional learning. And then the other that had a high impact was implementation. So how are you taking what you learn in your professional development and applying it to your practice? Thank goodness that one had a super high rating. At least I know people read the questions. At least I didn't know they just didn't go down the middle and check them that way. So there was some attention to the questions. So our conclusion then is that, first of all, through the literature review, is that micro-credentials are a format for professional learning that fit within a framework of Malcolm Knoll's theory of andragogy and Learning Forward standards. There is evidence that teachers who engage in micro-credentialing have higher student achievement scores than teachers who engage in traditional professional learning and also have higher perception ratings of the professional learning as measured by that standards assessment inventory. But it also leaves us into, we know that we want to be able to say without a doubt that micro-credentials have an impact on those 2 things that we want professional learning to push on: educator professional practice and student achievement. So we've got to find a way to effectively measure that teacher professional practice rating. And the system that we have now in our state doesn't really lend itself to that. So that's something I want to go back and revisit a little bit and think a little bit differently about. So we do need more study on that about the professional practice. But we also need to kind of think about what is that impact of micro-credentialing on teachers who have different experience and experience levels. So just because I have 29 years in education and a master's degree, does that really make a difference on how micro-credentials impact me versus someone who has 10 years experience and they've done the mountain writing project, the mountain reading project, they've done different academies, they've really been engaged in some high-level professional learning? What's the effect of micro-credentials on folks who have different experiences and experience levels? Also, What about educators who all earned the same micro-credential? Because those 50 teachers who earned a micro-credential that I studied, they all didn't earn the same one. They earned different micro-credentials. So what about researching 50 teachers who earned assessment literacy to 50 teachers who came and did a 6-hour workshop on assessment literacy, and then studying the impact on professional practice and student achievement and digging a little deeper. So I think that kind of tightens it up a little bit, but we aren't at such an experience level right now where we have 50 who've done the same that I have research access to. Also looking about how professional learning is considered part of a competency-based professional learning system. So what about that teacher that just goes off and finds a micro-credential that they want to earn and does it, versus a teacher who is part of a system where the principal is supporting them, the principal is coaching them, they're part of a professional learning community, their district has embraced looking at professional learning differently. What does that look like? Because some of the teachers in my study did just that. They said, ooh, I like that one, I'm going to do it just because I like to learn. And then others did it as part of their professional growth plan, aligned to what their principal tells them they need, aligned to a bigger study, trying to really dig deeper into that. So those are some things that we want to study next. We really think that these study results have implications. We think they have implications for teacher leaders as they think about their professional growth plans. As principals who coach teachers, who approve professional growth plans, who work with site-based councils in our state to decide what is the professional learning that teachers are going to pursue and receive credit for, to school boards, to school district administrators who write those professional development plans for the district, state education officials. We have bugged the daylights out of KDE. Really, Rob Akers, his first day on the job, we were calling him, can we come talk to you? We got something we got to talk to you about. And he was like, sure, come on. He didn't know enough to say no at that point. So the second day on the job, we were there. We want to talk to you about how micro-credentials fit in a system of continuing education, recertification, relicensure, maybe even initial certification. So we managed to break through on there, and they are pursuing that in terms of policy change. And then also to us, as we think about, as we move forward as a service agency, continuing to look at the needs that our folks have, what micro-credentials already exist out there, what are the ones that we need to develop, like that stack on rural students of poverty, what do we need to help make our region even better for our kids, for our teachers, and for our communities? What questions do you have, or what comments or discussions?
Can I ask, and pardon me if I missed it, are these results published yet?
That's a lovely question. I actually defended my dissertation on those results Thursday. So, yes. So they are public now. I'll be happy to share that with you. It is being bound as we speak. So yes, they are published, but I would be happy to send that to anybody that wants it. So micro-credentials have been pretty important to me because I do believe that it is the high quality professional learning that teachers deserve. As we're operating in a landscape where folks feel like they can't even give funding for teachers to engage in professional learning, it drives me insane. And this is exactly what our teachers deserve. And as our teachers engage in this type of professional learning, the first thing that always comes up is, I want to create this type of learning for my kids. That is honestly the first thing that our teachers talk about, is this is great. And I want to create learning like this for my students. So bless their hearts. I'll use my Southern colloquialism there. Bless their hearts. If that's what they want, then we want to give it to them.